Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to CSS Lesson 3. Today we're going to be talking about boxes. And I'm sure you are so happy to learn about boxes. But little did you know, boxes are actually extremely useful. And we're going to be talking a lot about boxes today and why they are useful. So first off, let's go ahead and ask ourselves, where are boxes used? I'm saying they're so useful, but where are they used? Now, the reason I say they're so useful is because CSS treats all HTML elements as if they were contained within a box. You might not see that box, but they are contained within a box, and that is how CSS will treat that HTML elements. They each have their own little box that they are contained within, and you can manipulate this box using CSS. So, there are two types of boxes, and they are distinct from one another. The first type is a block level box, which always starts on a new line. And those examples would be like your paragraph tag, your heading tag, or your body tag. All of those start on a new line, and they are considered block level boxes or elements, if you want to consider them. The second type is inline boxes, and all of these elements flow with or around the text. So an example might be the strong tag, underlining tag, the emphasis tag, or even the span tag, which we'll talk about in a future video. Now these are things that don't start on a new line, right? The strong tag isn't going to start a new line where your words are going to be bolded. It's going to be in that same line, and it's basically surrounding or flowing with that text inside of that block level box. So that's kind of interesting. Now notice that you can place boxes inside of another box, and this creates an interesting thing called inheritance. Now inheritance is when one box is nested in another. That outer box is known as the parent element, and the inner box is the child element. Makes sense? It's kind of biology, right? You have a box inside of another box. The inside box is the child element, and the outside box is the parent element. So if we were to look at an example, let's go ahead and open up our style tags here, so I haven't opened it up and closed. Then let's say that body, background, dash color, colon blue, border, dash color, blue. So that should show up if we go ahead and see. We see that if I had a heading and a paragraph inside of this body, all of these are going to have the background dash color blue, as you can see, and the border color blue as well. So this is the parent element, the body is the parent element, and heading and paragraph are inside of that body tag, and they are child elements. Now, something happens though, because notice that they have inherited the parent element's properties, even though the child elements never were specifically stated to have the background color blue or the border color blue. If we wanted to, we could override the inherited properties by doing a other tag. So we could say h1, p, border color red, and border color or background color red, border color red, and we can go ahead and change just the child elements, the specified elements here, and we would have them being a different color. So we can override inheritance, but unless we do so, the child elements will inherit the properties of their parent element. So that's pretty cool and very useful, and it's useful and also can be a problem if you don't keep track of where your parent and child elements are overlapping. So be careful with that. That's something I want to point out about boxes. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about box properties. So one of the most useful box properties is margin and padding. So margin controls the separation between the box border and other elements. So let's say that this black line is our box border, and then the margin is this invisible, let's say that this is invisible space between it and another element. So as you can see, we can change the size in the margin to be bigger, and we're going to get more and more separation from other elements. This is similar in concept to padding, which controls the separation between the border, right, this black border, and the content that it contains. So as you can see, we have this distance between the content and the border, and that is controlled using the padding property. So that's really useful. You can create some interesting spacing. Things won't be as condensed on your box, and you can have a lot more control over that. Now there's a bunch of other box properties like dimensions and styles that we have. We have width and height, and you can set width and height in terms of pixels, percentage of the containing box, or percentage of the visual window. I talked about those in a previous video. I think that was the first video, and this is a little bit more specific. Then we have the border style, which controls the style of the border. Note that the border style of our box is just default to none. So you can change the border style to be solid or ridged or grooved or whatever you want, but the default is none, which is why you never see the boxes that I'm talking about right now. We could change the border color of our box, the width of our border, the radius of the corners of each box, our background color, or we can place the background with an image. Now these are all really cool examples, and let's go ahead and see what we could do with an actual example. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at this example. So as you can see on the right I have the actual output over here, and then on the left I have the code. So I did a couple of things here. I went ahead and used what is known as the div tag. Now what that div tag does is allows me to create basically a section that I can then define a container for, which is what I did. I said div class equals fancy container, and then I defined that div.fancy container class here. Then inside of that, I put my header, which is, if you didn't know, the header is like that portion at the top where you normally see like banners. And then the inside of that, I put a heading which just says, "Let's go exploring." So I'm defining selecting two different things to declare rules for. It's that fancy container here, which you can see I defined as the class, and then the header, which is being used here, and then there's the heading on the inside of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these attributes. For the first one, let's look at the width for this fancy container. So if I change that to 70%, let's go ahead and see what happens. So that just changes the width of my actual box. So that's pretty straightforward. I liked 80%. That looks pretty good. Let's see if I change this position, and we'll talk more about position actually in the next video. So I'm not going to mess around with that too much right now. I have it as position relative, which means it's relative to the containing box which it is in, which is right now the header is inside of the body. Therefore, it is relative to the body, and it's 10% relative to that. Then I have this border, which I did shorthand notation here, so that I have a 1 pixel border that is solid black. I could change this to 5 pixels if I wanted to, and that would make it 5 pixels. As it's kind of hard to see. If I did it as white, it would be easier to see. So I can change that to white, and this is just shorthand notation of my box style. So white doesn't show up either because, well, the background's white. So let's do blue. That shows up now. So as you can see, we can change some of the attributes there. So I'm going to change that back to black because that looked good, and 1 pixel because I don't want a big border. The next thing I have is this border radius. Now as you can see here, I have 25, 25, 1 pixel, 1 pixel. So let's see what happens, what corner this changed. Remember, border radius changes the curvature of our corners. So if I look at this first one, let's see which one changed. Let's go to 10 pixels and see what changes. So it's this top left corner. Now, what happens is after that, it goes clockwise from there. So it goes top left, top right, bottom left. So if you want to see that, if I do the next one, it's going to change the top right, and then the next one would change the bottom right. So do that. And as you can see, it's changing it in a clockwise fashion. It's a similar thing for the border width. With the border width, I can change the top, right, bottom, or left. So if I do 10 pixels here, let's do 50 just so you can see it clearly. This should change the top border. And as you can see, the top border looks awful now, so it definitely did change. Let's go ahead and change that back to 5 pixels, and let's see if this was the right side border width as I thought it was. And as you can see, it changed that, and now it's the right side. So let's go ahead and change that back to 1 pixel because that looks much better. So that's that fancy container I have right there. And as you can see, it's nice and fancy. It's got some rounded edges, and then the corners on the bottom are not very rounded. But where is my background image? Now, I actually defined my background image inside of the header, which is contained within the fancy container. Now, I defined these two things separately because I wanted one box to contain the header, and then the header to have its own box on the inside. So I did that. You could do it with just one box. You wouldn't need to use the fancy container, but I did this because I wanted to make sure the text was centered and it looked better. So that's the reason I did this, is because now I can align my text center-wise a little bit easier than if I had just defined it for the header. So the first thing I did is to change the padding. So you can see here, if I did, instead of 5 pixels, did 15 pixels. Now it's going to separate that a little bit bigger. It's going to make it a little bigger. Let's go and see what 25 pixels. So as you can see, we're getting a bigger and bigger box because the distance between the content and the border is changing. Then next I said background URL, and then I gave it a link here. So the syntax for that is parentheses single quote and then your URL and then a single quote and a parentheses. So I chose this cool little star background because that looks really cool with my what I'm saying. Let's go exploring. It makes it just motivating, right? Now the next thing I did is background dash size cover. What that's going to do is it's going to cover the entirety of the containing box. So if I instead did something like stretch, let's see what happens. So now it just stretches it and doesn't really work quite properly. So as you can tell, it's not right. If I just took this entire thing out and just left it, as you can tell, it's zoomed in. It's the size of the image that it once was. So if instead I bring back that background dash size cover, it actually covers that full thing and it doesn't zoom in as much, and it sets that size a little bit better. So you can also actually define the size of the image in a different way. You could go ahead and say with width and height, you could say 80 pixels, 100 pixels, and that would be valid too. So now as you can see, now it's repeating. It's 80 pixels by 100 pixels and it's repeating. So I could go ahead and manually set that if I wanted to. Let's see what 400 pixels and 100 pixels does. And that's going to manually set it. See, it's still repeating. There's another thing called background dash repeat, which I can set to no repeat, and then it's just going to be not filled. But I use cover because it automatically does it for me. So if we look, I also changed the border radius of that header as well. Notice I selected the header, right? And so I changed that border radius of the header. Notice it's not the same border radius, and that is because of the border width, right? So I have a border, and to be contained inside of that border width at the top, I actually need to make the radius a little bit smaller. So if I instead did 25 pixels, let's see what happens. 25 pixels, 25 pixels. It actually doesn't bend with it. So as you can see, there's a little blank space there, and that's why I went ahead and did 21 pixels, is because of the border width of this transition here between, notice it's 5 pixels and 1 pixel, so it's actually transitioning between the border widths, and in order to do that, I need to make my radius change as well. So that is how you can actually manipulate this box. There's a lot of other attributes that you can play with. I could play with, if I wanted to, let's go up and do border dash color, and I could just change the border dash color to be blue. Remember, we played a little bit with that a second ago in the shorthand method, but we could do it that way. So these are some of the attributes. We could also instead go ahead and play with the box inside, and we can play with multiple boxes. Because remember, there's a box in the header as well, but I don't like to play with this. This looks pretty good. So if you have questions, feel free to comment on the video, and I'll get to you as soon as possible. But hopefully this was useful, and you can kind of see where boxes are useful. Again, if I just took out this border, let's see what happens. This box should still be there. Notice there's just no border anymore. You can't see the border, but it's still there. So if I didn't want that border, this actually looks better, doesn't it? Not having that black border around it, it actually looks a little bit better. So just because that border is not there does not mean the box isn't there. Because notice my image is still here, and I'm still able to mess with the width and the padding of each things, and it looks a lot better. So as you can tell, this is pretty cool looking, and hopefully you can experiment around with this, play with your own images and the padding and margin and things, and come up with something cool. So well, thanks for watching, and I look forward to another video. Next, we're going to be talking about positions and floats. So get excited for those. Those allow you to make a lot of cool things.